Since the creation of America, spies have been helping and hurting the United States, although not all of them have been recognized for their efforts. One of these people was Agent 355, a woman living during the Revolutionary War. Although she helped convict Benedict Arnold and Major John Andre, the head of England's intelligence in New York, 355 is the only name we know her by. She is now one of the greatest mysteries of American espionage. The information she gathered was invaluable to the United States before she was eventually caught in October 1780. 355 was arrested and put on the HMS Jersey, one of 5 prison ships in Wallabout Bay, along with her infant son. The ships were dreadful, and 12,000 prisoners died on them. The child's father was Robert Townsend, another spy in the area. He was able to get his son off the ship, but never saw Agent 355 again. 355's involvement in the Revolutionary War was just the beginning of the continued evolution of American espionage. Disloyalties in each progressive American war led to the invention of many new spying techniques. The Revolutionary War was the very start of American intelligence. Because there was no government in the early days of America, there was also no national spy organization, and there wouldn't be for many years. In a first attempt to solve this concerning problem, societies known as the Sons of Liberty were created. In 1772, Samuel Adams established the first Committee of Correspondence, which was meant to inform people of the actions of the British. By 1775, there were multiple committees of correspondence, and they were renamed the Committees of Safety, which were more militarily based. Around the same time in Boston, a group of laborers and artisans, including Paul Revere, formed their own spy group called the Mechanics. They were the first people in the colonies to spy on the British. Although these organizations helped the American cause, they were not strictly undercover operations, and George Washington believed there was a need for a more covert system. The first spy network of the colonies was the Cooper Spy Ring. In 1776, the British had control of New York and the colonies were losing the war. The Second Continental Congress appointed George Washington as the director of intelligence operations, and he wanted to build a spy network in New York to gather information on the British there. Major Benjamin Talmadge, under the codename John Bolton, made his idea a reality. Abraham Woodhull, under the codename Samuel Cooper Sr., was the head spy. Later, Robert Townsend took the name Samuel Cooper Jr. and replaced Woodhull in the city when it became apparent that Woodhull's extensive absence from his house in Long Island was arousing suspicions. Because Townsend was a dry goods merchant and enjoyed journalism, he had a perfect cover in the city. Townsend had a complex and secure method for delivering messages to Talmadge in Connecticut. Often his customer, Austin Rowe, would deliver messages to Woodhull through the use of a dead drop in Woodhull's pasture. A dead drop is a secret location for leaving messages. In this case, the dead drop was a box buried in the corner of the pasture. When Woodhull later dug up the box, he would look across to the clothesline of a woman named Anna Strong. If there was a black petticoat, that meant that the patriot Caleb Brewster was waiting to take the message across what is now Long Island Sound. The cave Brewster was in was displayed by the number of handkerchiefs on the line. The messages that the Coopers sent were written in a simple substitution code, in which 763 words and names, as well as the alphabet, were assigned numbers. The most well-known code today is 355, which stood for woman, but referred to the brave agent who is, as author Corey Ford puts it, as anonymous in death as she was in life, an American heroine without a name. Revolutionary War spies also used concealment devices such as hollowed-out metal balls, quills, and buttons. The technique of masked letters was also used. For a masked letter to work, a logical letter is written, but when another piece of paper cut into a predetermined shape is placed on top of it, the words inside the shape will spell out a message. George Washington was 711 in the Cooper code system. Spies often did not know each other or Washington. Washington often spread false information, sometimes through insecure mail. He had the Coopers exaggerate the Patriot's skill and had invisible ink specially made so that the decoder would be original. However, the Revolutionary War did not have the technology that the Civil War would bring, or nearly as much involvement in espionage. The Civil War brought some major technological advancements in American spying. Because there was no counterintelligence, spying was not nearly as dangerous as it is today. Espionage was still conducted by individuals without training or government connections. Much of the information that spies got was from runaway slaves, interrogations, or enemy newspapers. The biggest advancements in espionage in the Civil War were the spy balloons. The original balloon was tested in 1816, rising 500 feet with a transmission cable running to the ground. Soon after the initial launch, the Union created the Balloon Corps. The main purpose of the organization was to make maps of enemy structures. Muskets did not have a large enough range to shoot them down. The enemy began camouflaging their camps, such as painting logs black to look like cannons. The Confederacy tried to launch their own balloons, but chose to have a tugboat pull their first balloons of a steam locomotive, and it was captured when the boat hit a sandbar. The great invention of the Civil War was the telegraph. It was valuable for sending encrypted messages fast enough that they could be received in time to be meaningful. However, the telegraph did pose challenges because both sides tapped and destroyed the lines. Both sides soon realized that capturing the enemy's telegraph station would allow them to receive information and send out false intelligence. The Union sent messages using a 5x5 grid. The words were written in it from left to right, but transmitted by column. This replaced the use of simple substitution codes sent by lights and flags, but was still quickly decoded. One of the biggest developments of the Civil War was women involvement. After the Revolutionary War, women became everything from field agents to encryption specialists. One of these crucial women was Elizabeth Vanloo. Vanloo was a Southern woman whose belief in the abolition of slavery led her to become a spy for the Union. Most of her intelligence came from talking to Union soldiers at the Libby Prison Hospital, which she then passed on to Union Army commanders. She often used the false bottom of a platter to hide information. At one point, visitors were not allowed to speak to the prisoners, but Vanloo continued to communicate with them by hiding enciphered messages in the spine of a book, or by placing pinholes above certain letters on a page to spell out a message. A Confederate spy, Rose O'Neal of Greenhow, was Vanloo's opposer. She was just as firm in her belief that the South should win the war and slavery should be retained as Vanloo was in the opposite. Greenhow used simple substitution codes, as well as Morse code with windows, needlework, and handheld fans. In 1861, she was caught and placed under house arrest, but she continued to pass on information, sometimes using her yarn system she called her vocabulary of color. Later, she was sent to Old Capitol Prison for 10 months before her release in May 1862. Then set sail for Europe to try and gain support for the Confederacy. When she attempted to return in 1864 with the gold she had earned, she never saw the South she so longed to see again. When a storm hit, she argued with the captain until he let her try to make it to shore in a skiff with a few other sailors to avoid capture by the Union Navy. They had barely set off before they capsized. O'Neal was dragged down by the weight of the gold she carried. The next day her body was found along with the substitution code that she had been carrying with her. The Civil War may have brought some influential advances in spying, but World War I saw a dramatic decline in American intelligence. Enemy counterintelligence in World War I proved to vastly surpass American espionage when all of their messages were intercepted by the Germans, who cracked their simple substitution codes. This changed when American Captain Lawrence heard two men talking in a language he had never heard before. They told him it was their native Choctaw tribal language. This language became the code the Americans used in their messages, baffling the Germans and being one of the only intelligence successes of the war. The first official spy organizations were created in the 1880s, but they were minor and not influential during World War I. World War I also brought the first national espionage law, the Espionage Act of 1917, which allowed the U.S. to punish people who spoke or acted in a way that could oppose the U.S. politically or economically with up to 20 years in prison. This caused more problems than it solved because many people felt that their freedom of speech had been completely taken away. Americans had realized that espionage was vital to the country by the time of the Second World War. World War II started with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which was possibly a result of a lack of communication between the branches of the government. In 1941, what would later be known as the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, was created. In order to smuggle agents into other countries, the Research and Development section of the OSS created the I-Cache Close project. In New York Harbor, an OSS agent would meet European immigrants and trade their possessions for the ones owed by the immigrants. These possessions were either given directly to spies entering other countries or were kept as models to make replicas for other spies. Devices such as a .22 caliber pistol without muzzle flash, a bomb that looked like coal and another that detonated at a certain altitude, and a compound dubbed Aunt Jemima, which could be baked into bread that would later explode, were invented. A variety of spy cameras were also created, including the ABC wristwatch and Minox. There was no spy training at the beginning of World War II, so the British created Camp X near Toronto, Canada. 7 more similar camps were later constructed in the country. After completing the camps, spies went to a place called the Farm, where they learned survival in enemy territory, such as combat in close quarters, codes and ciphers, picking a lock, parachuting safely, inflating a rubber boat, and sabotaging railroad cars by taking grease from gearboxes and adding sugar to gas tanks. Once, a team had to work in an East Coast industrial city and find an FBI defense plant and blow it up, which really meant placing a piece of paper inside that said, "This is a bomb." The astounding improvements made during World War II seemed to erase the lull in espionage that occurred in World War I. The Cold War saw a large improvement in United States intelligence. After World War II, it was agreed that Germany would be divided up. The Soviet Union had control of the eastern section, along with the United States and England. France had control of the western section. Berlin, the capital, was divided up in the same way. However, Berlin was in the eastern section of the country. In June 1948, the Soviets stopped the other countries from entering the city by blocking western entry. This led to the Cold War. After numerous attempts to send a spy to East Berlin, the U.S. decided to build a tunnel to Soviet phone lines. The tunnel started in a vacant lot at the American side of Berlin, where 3 warehouses were built to conceal the digging. The tunnel ended up being 1,476 feet long and lined with sandbags to muffle the sounds. When wondering what to do with the soil, someone jokingly suggested that they should dig a hole and bury it. The Americans decided to take this advice literally. They hired workers to dig a cellar in a warehouse for extra storage. They then stored the 3,000 tons of soil from the tunnel. The Americans also realized that if the workers in the warehouse emerged covered in dirt every day, that the Soviets would become suspicious, so a washer and dryer were installed in the warehouse. When the tap chamber was built, it was believed that the cables were pressurized with nitrogen so that a pressure drop could be detected. The tap chamber was pressurized to minimize the drop, although the cables turned out not to be pressurized. 25 tons of tape were gathered in the 11 months and 11 days the tunnel was operating before it was discovered. The U.S. felt that it was inferior to the Soviets in terms of military and intelligence. The CIA was given permission from President Eisenhower in 1954 to build a spy plane called U-2. To construct the plane, they created Skunk Works, a group of engineers, scientists, businessmen, and government officials. To make the plane as light as it could be, the wheels were lost after takeoff, causing the landing to require braking with the wingtips. The cameras used for spying went through a series of innovations, but ended up being able to take pictures of objects as small as 30 inches wide from 11 miles up. Skunk Works wanted Air Force pilots, but the organization couldn't have a connection to the military. To solve this problem, they had the best pilots leave the Air Force to be rehired by the CIA. A suit was built for each pilot, which kept their body from expanding during flights. Each pilot carried poison-tipped needles to kill themselves as a precaution to avoid capture. There was also an explosive under the seat that would give a pilot 70 seconds to leave the plane before it blew up. The Cold War brought many of the significant advances in intelligence that are the basis of today's spying. Agent 355 would be surprised by the advances in American intelligence that have occurred since the days she was spying for the original colonies. 355 died on the prison ship and was buried with the other ship victims, but American intelligence has continued on to prosper and flourish. Today, spying has advanced to gathering intelligence over the internet and building spy satellites. None of this would have been possible without the brave spies who worked to protect our country before it was even established.